Hi, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name's Anna. I'm a clinical psychology doctoral candidate. On this channel, we talk about real-life applications to psychology, and today we're talking about the sunk cost fallacy, which is why I think a lot of people tend to stay in unhealthy relationships. So a few weeks ago, I was talking to my partner about an issue I was having, and he told me you can't make decisions about the future of a relationship based on the past of a relationship. And this was so wise. I was kind of thinking about it a couple days after he said it, and so I asked him where he'd heard of it, and he studies marketing, so he told me that it was a concept called sunk cost. Sunk cost, he said, is basically what you've already invested. And apparently there's something called the sunk cost fallacy, which actually transcends just marketing, which is this tendency to follow through with something just because we've already invested time or energy or material things into that thing, despite the fact that the future costs will outweigh the benefits. And I thought, wow, isn't that what so many of us do in relationships? And later that week, Dr. Ramani made a video on something very similar, and I thought, what are the chances that I learn about this concept? I'm gonna make a video. What? And I thought, what are the chances that I'm gonna make a video on a topic, I've already scripted it, and then just a couple days later, Dr. Ramani makes a video on pretty much the same topic, especially such a niche topic that I don't hear people talking about often. But after I watched the video, I realized we actually have somewhat different things to say on the matter, and she tends to focus mostly on narcissism. And so I thought, you know what, I've already written out the script, let me just give my thoughts on the concept. So I want you to think back on a time when you were considering ending a relationship. Not necessarily a romantic relationship, it can be pretty much any type of relationship. When you realized it might be time to end that relationship, it was probably around the time you realized I keep losing in this relationship, losing energy, my time, my youth, my self-esteem, my self-respect, whatever it may be. Oftentimes, it takes a lot for us to realize that we are losing our investment, because up to a certain point, we know that an investment is an investment. We expect things will get better in the future if we give enough of ourselves in the present moment. Yet sadly, a lot of our effort is swallowed with no return on investment when it comes to relationships. When it comes to business, yes, investments often pay off. You spend $4 million in marketing your product, you're probably going to see some return on sales. But in relationships, unfortunately, investments just aren't as reliable. And if you're investing in someone only to find yourself losing your happy emotions, losing your self-esteem, losing other people in your life, losing your dreams, it is a fallacy to assume that things will get better in the future. It does not make sense to predict your investment will do a lot better in the future if it has been tanking your resources for months or years. And we tend to assume that our investment just hasn't paid off yet. But in relationships, unlike in business, investments are actually supposed to see rewards pretty instantaneously. If you're spending months and months single-handedly trying to fix a relationship that has never fully worked, it's not that your investment hasn't reaped the rewards yet, it's that your investment is failing. I've known a lot of people in both clinical and personal settings who had hopes for their future with someone that were not based on the facts of the past. I've certainly been guilty of this myself, as I have a tendency to wait until the very last moment before cutting off a relationship with someone, long past the moment when I should. It's something I've been working on, something I think I've been getting much better at, but it's still a very conscious struggle for me. It's like giving someone a choice between losing $2,000 now or losing $8,000 in a few years. Why would someone want to keep losing if they can put an end to that now? Nothing will give them those $2,000 back, but they can't cling to the very small probability that their investment could suddenly flip to be profitable. Unfortunately, many people go through life staying in those lost investments. They lose more and more and more, and by the end of their life, they've never put an end to it. I certainly hope that won't be any of you watching, because past behavior truly is the best predictor of future behavior. If someone has been rude, unfaithful, aggressive, and so on up until now, why would they suddenly change? Yes, there's a tiny, minuscule chance that maybe they will change, but when making a decision, we have to consider both the probability and the severity of the outcomes. For instance, this was something that was explained to me in my first clinical rotation on the south side of Chicago. There is a small probability that a plane will crash, but a very high severity if it does happen. If a plane does crash, probably not going to survive it. Versus when you get into a car, pretty moderate probability of a car crash, those are pretty common, and a pretty moderate severity because of course the consequences could range in terms of how severe they are. So it doesn't really make sense to fear getting on a plane when relatively speaking, the consequence is just as bad as getting into a car in terms of combining probability and severity. So if we think about this in terms of relationships, if there's a large probability that this person will never change and a high severity in terms of negative consequences for you, is that a risk you want to take? People think that if they only invest more, perhaps they will start getting some return on investment, when in reality they just end up losing more and more and more. And in some cases, people lose a lot in these relationships. Basically, anyone that has embarked upon a long-term relationship, gone on a trip with someone, moved in with someone, had a pet with them, got married, had a family, had kids, that person is deeply entrenched in a very large investment. Going through a divorce, for example, is an extremely grueling, painful, often costly experience. Going from a united family to suddenly a split where you have to split custody can be heart-wrenching. Although studies show this is better long-term if the family was not happy to begin with. Having to move out of your home, extremely difficult. Having to decide who gets to keep the pets, extremely heartbreaking. These are huge investments that we're placing in relationships. If someone in that situation suddenly decides to move away, they are sacrificing years of investment. Becoming family or uniting lives with someone is a huge risk, and that's partly what makes it so beautiful. In that moment, you're saying, I don't know whether this will work out. There are absolutely no certainties in life, but I think it's worth risking it for a chance of happiness with you. But where it becomes problematic is when we start to think, well, I need to make this work even though it hasn't been working for a really long time because of all I've invested in it. As opposed to, you know what, I took an L and that's okay. I gave it my all and now it's time to cut my losses. So what can we do about this? Before I go into that, I just want to give a word from today's sponsor, Call Me Go. Anxiety is something I know a lot of us struggle with, especially related to this topic, where I feel like fear of abandonment, not wanting to end relationships is really closely tied with anxiety. And I've talked ad nauseum about grounding skills and breathing exercises to help you deal with anxiety. I personally find such techniques to really help de-escalate my own anxiety. And today's sponsor, Call Me Go, is another really great way of combining grounding skills with breathing exercise. Call Me Go is a smart calming companion that you exhale into, which, like I said, combines the idea of grounding yourself in the senses through touch and scent, as well as doing actual paced breathing, which is usually very helpful when we talk about things like anxiety, because hyperventilating is a very common symptom. Call Me Go is this tool that you exhale into through the mouth until it vibrates and the lights turn on, and you inhale through your nose. And you're supposed to do this for about 3 minutes. So let me just show you how to do it. Turn on the button. So as you can see, it vibrates when you've breathed for long enough. And this is really helpful because when we're talking about breathing exercises, we want the exhale to be as long as possible so that we're not hyperventilating very shallow and short breaths. We want us to really breathe deeply in from our core, not from just our chest, but from down here. So this is grounding in the sense that, first of all, you're feeling it on your lips and you're inhaling this nice scent, which is just this tiny little piece here. Little known fact, but actually the parts of the brain that process smell are slightly different from the parts of the brain that process your other senses. It's closer to the limbic system, which is where you process your emotions, which is why when we smell something that reminds us of an old memory that's very emotionally fueled, we're suddenly filled with nostalgia or that particular emotion that we associate it with, and which is why these scents are really important in just calming us down as quickly as possible. It's drug-free and provides immediate relief within a few minutes. Like I said, use it for 3 minutes. It can help with anxiety, panic attacks, stress, general emotion regulation, and so forth. And it's easy to use because it's so small and discreet, and people can maybe mistake it for an inhaler even though it's not. People can think that maybe you're just having an asthma attack when in reality you're de-escalating a panic attack. It has no side effects and is recommended by healthcare professionals. Case in point, I've been using Call Me Go for stress relief ever since I received it in the mail. It's really recommended that you do practice these grounding techniques before you're actually escalating, in a moment when you're actually neutral, so that when you do have anxiety, you already know how to use it, you know how to practice. And I can really see how it would be helpful for stress or anxiety or people with strong emotions. I was able to get $15 off for those of you watching that want to purchase it. So I invite you to look in the description box for your own personal discount code. It helped me a lot. I know it's going to help you too. So get your Call Me Go now with your $15 off discount code in the description box using the link below. Thank you, Call Me Go, for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to the topic. Going back to the topic, what does it actually mean if we're realizing we're using the sunk cost fallacy? What can we do to move on from this? Honestly, the solution in those moments, if we're bleeding money or bleeding resources or bleeding energy, the solution is always to cut your losses. Stop the bleeding from the source. Because otherwise we keep giving more and more and more of ourselves until we have nothing, until the loss is huge. Yes, we could walk away today after going on a 3-year relationship. That would be difficult, but it would be even more painful to instead wait another 20 years and then suddenly have to break off the relationship. Your losses at that point are much bigger. People always tend to think, well, I've invested so much at this point. Yes, you have, but this is nothing compared to what it could be. No one has ever looked back on a relationship that drained them and thought, I wish I'd stayed in that a little bit longer. There is liberty in loss. There is freedom in finally saying, you know what? Yes, I lost, but that's behind me now. I can look towards the future with a fresh start. I'm not still tethered to those circumstances of my investment, and I've learned a lesson that will prove valuable in the future. When we say, I lost, I'm done with this, it's bittersweet. It's bitter because obviously we don't like to lose. We want to win. It would be preferable to win. But it's sweet because I'm done with this implies we're done losing. We've learned our lesson and now we're ready to move on with our lives. So does this mean we should be more risk aversive? If you're constantly investing in relationships that leave you in a deficit, you may want to examine whether you're investing recklessly. Just like someone who's constantly losing financial investments would have to take a seat and say, why am I wrongly assessing the value of these investments? So we would have to do if we're always losing in relationships. Yes, it's certainly true that some of us will need to be slightly more cautious with where we choose to invest. If you're always taking loss after loss in relationship, it's worth reframing the way that we assess return on investment. You may find that, befriending people just based on who's available to party with you doesn't really result in quality friends. Or always going after people who aren't over their ex doesn't mean you have a positive relationship with them. But jumping into relationships means you don't actually know the person's true character yet. Once you do that, it's not about becoming completely risk aversive per se, because like I said, there is some beauty in some level of risk in relationships, and you'll end up alone if you never take any risks. But it is simply about investing in a different type of relationship, figuring out what works for you and what doesn't, what hasn't been working for you so far. And of course, when something isn't working for you, cut your losses. Don't make decisions about the future based on the past. But here's another perspective that I know some of you will bring up. Sometimes people go through phases, both individually and relationally. Maybe your partner is depressed this year and they're a little crankier than their usual self, but they'll be back to normal in a couple months. Maybe your friend hasn't been able to see you in months because they had a really busy semester, but soon they'll have time to start seeing you again. Maybe you're fighting with a family member over a disagreement that has been going on for a really long time, but you're just about to resolve your issues and come to remediation. There are times when that investment does flip on you, when it starts to pay off. It's not up to me or anyone else to tell you what you need to do. You have to make your own decisions. But here are some questions just to help you guide whether this is just a low phase or whether it's time to cut your losses. Has this relationship ever been good? If so, for how long? How long hasn't it been good for? For instance, if your honeymoon phase lasted 2 months and that was a year ago, seems pretty slim in the grand scheme of a long-term relationship, pretty low indication that things will ever be that great again. Another question to ask yourself is, over the course of your relationship, have the good times generally overshadowed the bad? Do you feel like this relationship drains you more than it nourishes you? How much of a loss are you taking right now? Is this just tension with a friend, or did they do something extremely hurtful that you don't see yourself moving past? Is this loss temporary, or is it here to stay? For instance, have you changed in separate directions and you'll never be the people you used to be when the two of you were happy? Like childhood friends suddenly looking at each other and realizing, hold on, this isn't the friend that I befriended. So those are just some questions, just some food for thought. It's in no way intended to talk you out of cutting someone off who's making you feel like you're investing too much, but I do think it's important to consider the big picture when making any sort of decision. I hope you're able to make the decision that best serves you, and I hope that if you're taking a loss right now, that it stops soon. Let me know in the comments what you think about the sunk cost fallacy. Have you heard of it before? Because I know I for sure haven't. And check out Call Me Go in the description box if you'd like to purchase the product.